All right. So once again, welcome back everybody for our next session. Coming up next, we have Laura Waddle from the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources, where Laura has been a GIS specialist for the past 18 months. In this role, she provides geospatial data, application, and mapping support for the Division of Forestry. Working closely with colleagues in the Forest Fire Prevention section, she developed the DNR's Wildfire and Prescribed Fire dashboards in early 2021. Prior to relocating to Wisconsin, she lived in Texas and was the GIS supervisor for the City of Houston 911 program's GIS team. There, she provided GIS support to the Houston Fire and Police departments and integrated spatial data such as roads and address points into the 911 computer aided dispatch system. In the past, she has also worked as a GIS specialist at the Indiana Department of Natural Resources and as a cartographic specialist at the Indiana Geologic and Water Survey. Her academic background is in environmental science, which she pursued at McGill University in Quebec, Canada, and at Indiana University. So thank you so much, Laura, for joining us. I will be giving you just a 5-minute warning towards the end so we would have time to allow for any kind of questions.
Okay, sounds
Thanks so
great.
much. I'll kick it over to you, Laura.
All right. Well, thank you all so much for the opportunity to give you a virtual tour of the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources Wildfire dashboard. I'm excited to be here. I'm going to stop sharing my video just because I'll be looking at different monitors. I don't want to be distracting for folks. All right. So in this presentation, I'm going to start it out with answering the question of what is a dashboard? And then I'll get into the business for this particular dashboard, as well as the technical approach and development process. Then I'll also talk a little bit about how the dashboard is being used and future plans that we have. And then I'll do a virtual tour of the dashboard and wrap up with questions. Just going to keep track of time here for myself. All right. So first things first, what is a dashboard? There are many different interpretations of dashboards out there, but they're typically understood to be applications that convey at-a-glance views of key information related to a certain topic through interactive data visualization. So things like infographics, charts, and maps, for example. And dashboards are often used for situational awareness because they can provide real-time or near real-time updates to help inform decision-making as events unfold. So for this particular dashboard, there was a strong business need. In 2018, the Wisconsin DNR began providing active fire status to customers via the Wisburn application, which is the DNR's burning restrictions map. And I'll show you that real quick. So you can see in Wisburn, one second here, the active fire status information is pretty high level. So I'll go to wildfire to date this year. So you can see there's some statistics for wildfire counts and total acres burned, and then you get a few fields. You get a little bit of information about the individual fires. But while we've been providing this active fire status through Wisburn for a few years, up until we created the wildfire dashboard, there hasn't really been a known application within DNR or among partners that provided for more complex querying options and charting options and data visualization to customers for spatial and temporal trends in wildfire activity. So the wildfire dashboard really helps fill this need and helps us provide better customer service through this one-stop shop for this type of information and functionality, and it is mobile responsive. The wildfire dashboard also helps better educate the public about wildfire trends and seasonal impacts to mitigation. So the idea is that with better education comes fewer wildfires and therefore lower costs of wildfire suppression and losses. And then finally, allowing users to do things like query data, filter data, and even export data of interest from the dashboard cuts down on the amount of time that DNR staff are spending responding to routine requests for wildfire data and analyses. All right, so in developing this particular dashboard, there were several requirements. For example, it had to be a publicly available resource. And so there were some additional considerations about what data to expose in the dashboard because of this. And I'll talk about that a little bit more later on in this presentation. Other requirements, the dashboard had to contain a map that had wildfire points and perimeters and attribute data associated with that spatial data. It also had to, again, allow users to do things like filter and query and export static snapshots of wildfire data. But along with that, the near real-time data stream, if you will, or also known as the map services, those had to be secured with credentials. And that's to prevent that real-time or near real-time data stream from being pulled into other third-party web maps or web mapping applications. The dashboard also needed to be mobile responsive. So this means that it has to be able to recognize the user's screen size, and it has to be optimized for smaller screens to the extent possible. And then finally, the dashboard had to be built with a program that the Wisconsin DNR already supports, such as an ArcGIS Online program. Okay, so again, because the dashboard is a public resource, it can't contain sensitive information. So things like responsible party identification information and certain wildfire causes such as arson, for example, and detailed cost breakdowns. So for the development of this dashboard, we selected ArcGIS Web App Builder as the program. This is a program within ArcGIS Online, and there are other ArcGIS Online programs that you can use to build dashboards. And this table shows the differences between them as far as functionality goes. And I will note here that you do have to have an organization level ArcGIS Online account in order to use these programs and create dashboards with them. So the reason we went with Web App Builder is because at the time that we were evaluating these different programs for the wildfire dashboard, the requirements of the dashboard really went beyond the functionality that was available in both ArcGIS dashboards and Experience Builder. But I will say Experience Builder is the newest program and it uses the latest web technology. So, and as you can see kind of in this table too with the asterisks, there is a lot of functionality available now in Web App Builder that wasn't available even earlier this year. So we will likely be migrating the dashboard to Experience Builder in the future as the technology continues to change. But for now, we are using Web App Builder, and the development of the dashboard was carried out through a number of steps, the first of which was to configure data for use in the dashboard. So the way this works is that there's an internal DNR application that's called the Individual Forest Fire Reporting System, also known as IFRS. And the data is managed in IFRS, and it's stored in a database with many different tables and spatial data sets. So the dashboard consumes IFRS data that's specifically configured for use in the dashboard, and it consumes it in near real time. But there's no managing or editing of the data that's happening in the dashboard. That's all happening in the IFRS application. So in going through the IFRS data and working with folks in the forest fire protection section, we really had to look at each field in the data and determine what we were going to expose in the dashboard and what we were not going to include in the dashboard. So this is where we omitted all narratives from the data, for example, and we omitted personal information for responsible parties. And we also added some logic here. So for example, until a fire cause is determined, the dashboard will just report that fire cause as not available. And same with if a fire cause is determined to be arson, the dashboard will say not available. So these are some things that we had to do to kind of make sure we're not showing any sensitive information in the dashboard. And To configure the data for use in the dashboard, I did have to use an ArcGIS desktop license. So that's just something to keep in mind. Okay, so next up, once that data was configured for use in the dashboard, we published map services that contain that configured data. And to do this, your organization does have to have an ArcGIS server license to publish map services. And we also secured those map services with credentials. So like I said earlier, this is to prevent users from being able to access those map services and pull them into their own web maps, for example. But a note here as a reminder, dashboard users can download data from the dashboard. It's just that those are static snapshots of data. They can't access the live data stream directly. Okay, so after that, we created and designed an ArcGIS Online web map that contains those published map services. And this did require an ArcGIS Online account to do this. And in this step, you have to consider things like the colors and symbology for the data layers in the map, and things like labels and pop-ups and the scales at which you want your data labels to draw. So next, we then created and designed the dashboard itself, and the dashboard contains that web map that was created earlier. And in designing the dashboard, again, you have to keep in mind things like dashboard content. So we had to decide what charts we were going to include and what tools we wanted to include to allow users to filter data and query data and export data. And then we also had to think about look and feel, so placement of the various dashboard components and how everything would display on a small screen, for example. And then just kind of higher level things like look and feel, colors, fonts, and things like that. So that's a pretty involved step, number 4. Next up, we deployed the dashboard to ArcGIS Online, and we did formal user testing and acquired all the necessary reviews for the dashboard from the Office of Communications, for example. And the last piece was to change the sharing level in ArcGIS Online to public, and that's essentially what made the dashboard go live. So that was the last step. We did not heavily advertise the dashboard after it went live or after it was launched, so to speak, but we can track usage through ArcGIS Online. And we saw the highest number of views around April 4th when the governor declared a state of emergency in response to elevated wildfire conditions throughout the state. So you can see that peak here in this usage chart. So it's been interesting to be able to kind of track usage of the dashboard over time. And then there's also some examples of where the media has used and covered the dashboard. So I have some links here in the presentation, and the PowerPoint has been uploaded to the Excel events site. If you'd like to take a look at some of those stories and videos, some of the stories use the dashboard, and there is one that actually covers the launch of the dashboard itself. So it's been really interesting and cool to see how the dashboard is being used, and we hope that it'll continue to be used, and maybe even, we're hoping that folks will use it even more in the future as we plan to migrate the dashboard to Experience Builder, as I said earlier. And with that, we really want to customize and optimize the small screen or mobile interface even more, which is something you can do with Experience Builder. We also plan to add wildfire data prior to 2016, which is the current limit to what the dashboard is displaying. And then finally, we do have plans to develop another dashboard or potentially a different type of web mapping application to display information about wildfire risk in Wisconsin. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and get into the dashboard so I can show you how it works and what it looks like. So let me go full screen actually real quick. All right. So this is the landing page for the dashboard on the DNR internet site, and you can get to it just by clicking this button here. And As the dashboard loads, the first thing you'll see once this is finished loading is this blue splash screen. And this just has user tips and information about the data in the dashboard, as well as disclaimers and contact info. So to access the dashboard, you just have to accept this screen here. And then what you're seeing, there's a few components that are still loading here, but what you're seeing here is this central map panel and then surrounding dashboard components on either side. And the first thing you'll notice is that we are looking at wildfire occurrence points for 2021. So you can see that here in the data key. This is that really dark red circle. And the reason for that is that you have a number of date filters that are pre-configured over here. And we have current year to date toggled on by default. So that's why you're just seeing 2021 wildfire occurrence points in the map when you first open it up. And we have infographics here for wildfire count and acres burned. And then there are several charts over in the lower right. So you'll see as I scroll through these, and I'll show you some of these in more detail later, but there's a bunch in here. These are all going to display data that's tied to whatever filters you have toggled on. So wildfire count, acres burned, charts, and your map. This is all for 2021 right now, because that's the filter I have turned on. So if I were to turn on last year to date as well, you'll see some things changing here. You'll see these infographics updated, this chart down here updated, and then what you're seeing in the map has updated to reflect that new filter. So that's kind of how filtering works. And here in the map, you can click on individual fires to find out more about them. There's a lot of info here just in the pop-up about the fire. So acres burned, dates, information about the cause. There's info about structures saved and lost. And let's see what else. Location info, cover type. There's even information about weather, some weather indices at the reported time, like wind speed and air temperature. And then if available, there's total equipment and personnel counts, as well as total cost. So just right there in the pop-up, you can actually glean a ton of information about the fire itself. Another thing you can do is you can export data from the dashboard. So I talked about that a little bit during the presentation. One way to do that is through the attribute table. So there's several tabs here in the attribute table, and those correspond to the same time slices that we have available in the date filters. So if I go to current year to date, for example, it's going to load the data for current year. And so you see down here in the lower left, there's a number of features, 929. So that's 929 individual wildfires for current year to date. And you could go ahead and export this to a CSV if you wanted to, just by going to options here. Another kind of fun thing you can do is with acres burned, you can take a look at statistics for that field. So again, 921 fires, that represents just under 2,000 acres burned. And you can get the average too, 2.13 acres burned is the average. So you can export data from any of these tabs in the attribute table. Okay. Another way to export data, I'm just going to zoom in a little bit here so we can see this a little bit more clearly. Okay, another way to export data is with the select tool here in the map panel. So I'm going to click here just to show you how this works. I want to select just from the wildfires layer. So I'll go ahead and turn off these other layers that are checked on by default. So just wildfires, and let's say you just wanted to grab these right here, for example. They turned blue, and you'll see a count here, 4. So I've just selected 4 wildfire points. And with this More Options button, this exposes different things you can do. So you could export just the tabular data for those to a CSV, or you could even export the spatial data, which contains that tabular data as well, to a GeoJSON file. So GeoJSON is a format that it's a spatial data format that you can pull into other web maps. You can even use it in desktop GIS programs. So that's one way that you can export the actual spatial data. And then again, statistics, you could take a look at the total acres burned field and get some statistics for whatever you have selected here. So for wildfires representing 1.3 acres burned for just those that I selected. So I'll go ahead and clear that. And I'm going to go ahead and turn on this filter for since 2016. So that represents the entire spatial data set that's available in the dashboard. And I'm going to move this chart over to a different one, just so you can kind of see an example of another chart. And if you hover over the bars in this chart, you'll get the wildfire counts and acres burned. And you can toggle these series on or off if you'd like to. You can see here 2021 was pretty heavy year as far as acres burned compared to other years. So going back to the map, I want to show you a couple other things you can do. So let's say you had heard of a fire by name and you wanted to learn more about it. You could go up to your search bar and type that name in here. So I'm going to do that for one of these wildfires from 2021. And you'll see the map took you right to that fire and it brought up the pop-up for you. So that's one way to search for individual fires. Another way is, let's say you were interested in a particular reported date. You could put that in the search bar and it'll bring back all the fires that occurred on that date. So you can pick the one that you're interested in based on the time. And again, your map's going to take you right there and bring the pop-up into view for you. So while I'm here, I'll go over to the map layers panel over here. This is where you can turn different layers on or off in your map. And I just wanted to show you, we also have wildfire perimeters in here. So I'm going to turn those on. And at this extent, they're grayed out. So that just means you have to zoom in a little bit further in order to see those perimeters. So I'm going to do that. See if we can see some. There's one. So as I zoom in, you'll see those perimeters start drawing. So now you're getting not just the point, like the occurrence point, but you're getting this perimeter as well. And there's a pop-up associated with that. Other layers, let me go back a couple zoom levels here. Other layers here in the layer list that you could turn on, ranger stations, for example, DNR ranger stations. There's one down here that has a pop-up associated with it as well. And weather stations. Let me turn that one on. Here's one. So if you click on the weather station, it'll give you the latest reading from that weather station. Just something, interesting to note if it is kind of a high risk day for wildfire. Wind speed, air temperature, and relative humidity, as you all know, play into that. So there's several other layers here available to turn on or off. And one other thing that's kind of cool is while you are in your layer list, you're limited to these layers. You also have the ability to add data that's not kind of pre-configured in the dashboard. And you would do that through this add data button here in the map. So I'll show you kind of how that works. There are several organizations that publish map services, and they often share the URLs for those. So I just went out and grabbed one off of a website. I'm going to put the URL in here and add that to the map. Let's see, did that work? Oh yeah, there it goes. Okay, and so you'll see now, if I turn these other layers off, I think I added it twice accidentally, but that's okay. I'm going to zoom to the full extent here. So this is a wildfire hazard potential layer that was published by another organization, and I was able to just pull it directly into this dashboard. So that's kind of a handy piece of functionality. And that's something you can do with Web App Builder that we were not able to do with those other ArcGIS Online programs that I mentioned earlier. So I'll go ahead and remove those layers. I want to show you one more thing quickly because we just have a couple more minutes, I think. But let's say you had a shapefile, for example, on your computer. This is a zipped shapefile here. I'm going to go ahead and add that to my map. And I'll turn wildfires back on. So let's say this represented a 5-mile buffer around your house, for example. One thing you could do, let's say you wanted to know more about just the wildfires that occurred within that particular area, you could do a spatial query. So I'm going to come here to export and wildfire spatial query. And I'm going to choose only return features that have a spatial relationship with features in another layer. And for that other or related layer here, I'm going to pick that shapefile that I just added, that 5-mile radius. I'm going to give my output a name. I'm going to say wildfires within 5 miles of house. Hit apply.
Laura, this is your 4-minute warning, please. Thank you.
Okay, yep, thank you. And here we go. Well, we're seeing just the results, just those wildfires that occurred within that particular area of interest. There are 23 of them right here. And one more time, you can export the spatial data there, export CSV, or find out a few more statistics. So I know that was super quick. There is a user guide linked here if you're interested in learning more about how to use the dashboard. But given the time, I think we will open it up for questions.
All right, excellent presentation, Laura. I'm not seeing any specific questions pop up yet in the chat
Okay.
or in the Q&A. There was one about, was there a link? And then we've already posted that into the chat. So if anybody's
Okay.
interested in following the link to see your dashboard, it's right there available for them already. And then there was a comment from Kara, who's also a part of our committee putting on the workshop, saying she's very interested in your dashboard, but she's going to watch it later when she can, devote her focus to it. But she may be reaching out for more questions.
That sounds great. Yeah. And like I said, there is a user guide that kind of goes through all the different aspects of the dashboard and how to interact with it. So if anybody is interested in learning more, they're welcome to click this link here in the dashboard itself.
Great. Thank you so much, Laura. That was fascinating. And thank you for your time this afternoon.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Yes, thank you. Okay, and so just a reminder to our participants, we are going to take just a short break and we are going to meet up again at 4:15. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.